Hey, what's going on? It's Dr. Mike T. Nelson here, doing a talk on the impact of cannabis and CBD on exercise recovery and adaptation for Renaissance periodization here. Big thanks to Dr. Mike Israel, Nick, and everybody over there for having me do this one. Super excited about this, and I think it will be very useful. There's a lot of talk about CBD. There's some interesting stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's absolutely not correct, and we'll use some cool research to jump into this. My goal is to make this less than an hour, so I'm really working hard to try to condense everything down. So as you can tell, this is the cannabis plant, known as marijuana, weed, Mary Jane, all sorts of other different names. Initially, I started checking into this about 3 years ago. I grew up and assumed that all things related to cannabis were bad because that's what the media had told me. And as I started checking out the research, I realized, oh, maybe that's not so true. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about that journey here also. But unfortunately, it seems like everyone is either very pro or very con. Not many people are anywhere in the middle, and not much of any of it is based really on any research. So some people are very pro that it's going to help everything from glaucoma to inflammation to pain, and we see all sorts of crazy ads with CBD now curing everything. And other people are like, no, that's the devil's lettuce. It's a horrible thing. That's a gateway drug. It's going to crush all your gains. Your testosterone is going to drop to the level of your shoes, and it's bad. So we're going to see is there's somewhere in between. And again, we won't be able to cover everything in this 1 hour, but we'll cover a lot of it, and we'll give you a really good jumping off point if you want to check into this further. So my quick background, super quick. I did a PhD in exercise physiology, University of Minnesota, primarily looking at more metabolic flexibility research. I presented on that to DARPA, it's the Defense Advanced Resource Projects Agency, do some peer reviews, publish some research once in a while. Before that, I did an MS in mechanical engineering and a Bachelor of Arts in Natural Science and a minor in chemistry, minor in math. I currently own Extreme Human Performance, faculty member at the Carrick Institute for Functional Neurology, instructor at Rocky Mountain, certified sports nutritionist, and CSCS. So basically, if I put that in little pictures, you see all sorts of little stuff pop up here. I'm not an expert on cannabis per se, but I have the ability to read research and to look at how it relates to exercise. If you know me, you know I'm a huge fan of coffee, Guinness, and death metal. So you can just think of three things that are dark. And the analogy that I'll try to draw at the end here, but I will give it to you now anyway, is if you look at any compounds that are relatively complex, we could argue coffee is one of them. We have all sorts of microbrews and stuff now. Coffee has been legal for a long time, has different compounds and chemicals in it. Maybe similar to cannabis. And there's a ton of stuff that we do know about caffeine in terms of its effect on performance and recovery, but there's a lot of stuff that we don't really know much about yet. We're still working to figure out, despite many decades of active research. So when something like marijuana is currently federally illegal, it makes it very hard to study. And things in nature that are very complex, it's going to take us quite a while to use science to figure out exactly what's going on, which also makes it interesting. So I'm going to try to speak mostly English. I will use some geek in here, but we will define the terms for you also. In terms of disclosures, I do have an affiliate links, places on the web you can find for CBD and some hemp products. So I do make a little bit of money through that, through one specific company. But there's no links or anything in this presentation. I tried not to use a lot of brand names or anything like that, so I don't have any association with any of the links or the pictures in this presentation. I looked up the word disclosure online, and I guess it's a band called Disclosure, and that's their picture. So The first thing I always have in most of my talks here is when we're talking about exercise, especially looking at the effects of cannabis on exercise and recovery, we can't forget about overload. So a lot of times we want to jump into what is the uber sexy thing to do with my recovery, but we need to maximize our overload. Obviously, you've seen presentations here from Mike Isertel talking all about that, so make sure you check out his stuff. Big shout out to Mike Tushira also here for lifting all of the plates at the meet. A mouse study that I always like to go back to, because you probably haven't seen a mouse study where they did hind limb suspension, and you probably haven't seen the famous squatting mouse study. Yes, they did a study where they had the mouse squat. If you look real closely, you can see that he is attached to an electrical stimulator. So they had to kind of zap the little bastard in order to get him to squat. Again, I would not recommend this with your clients. It's probably not going to turn out real well. This is a hind limb suspension model. And what they do is they take the back legs and they suspend them in the cage. So the little guy is wandering around on the front limbs all the time. And the back limbs are unloaded. So what's, I guess, cool for us science people, but probably not real great if you're a mouse lover, is you can then compare the back legs to the front legs. So the front legs of the mouse are seeing a huge amount of overload. So the little guy's having to walk around in them all the time. In the same mouse, the back legs are seeing very little load. So we can compare the front legs to the back legs. And again, in our squatting mouse study, we can add more load, and we can see what are the systemic effects. And the big takeaway with this is you can do all sorts of cruel things to the little guys. You can castrate them, you can put them on low-protein diets, and all sorts of other icky things. If you have enough overload, we still see hypertrophy in strength in them, despite quote-unquote less than optimal conditions. So if you get the overload portion right in your training, and that is one of your main drivers, right, which is beyond this talk, so check out some other great talks on that. You can screw up a lot of things with quote-unquote recovery, and you're still going to be miles ahead. Right, so just a reminder that you want to make sure you have overload in place. At minimum, you have a system for tracking it and doing that, and then we can talk about exercise performance and recovery. And even in cases where it was less than ideal, enough overload, you're going to see progress. So please make sure you have that in place. And again, overload can see many different forms. You can just simply think of it as maybe stress. So one of the things I like to do is to pick up heavy dumbbells, working up to the inch dumbbell, not quite there yet. So this is a solid cast, 100-pound dumbbell, and you can see the handle's pretty large, like a pop can, so it makes it a little bit trickier. You can put your head in alligator mouth, so I wouldn't recommend it. Or I have people in the supplement industry that send me various supplements to test out. This one was clear. You can't even really see it in the container. Nothing else was there. He went to the, it looks like Home Depot there, and bought the Good Grips container, which makes me a little nervous about what I was actually measuring. So after much debate, I did try it, and I survived. Tasted god-awful, but that one is actually one of the very first ketone esters. So in this talk, I am only talking about research, maybe a little bit of anecdotal stuff here and there, and we are not talking about any ethics or legality. This may change over time, but for right now, we'll get into the legality of it, but that's not going to be our main discussion. So, as of this recording, THC and marijuana is still considered federally illegal. So take that for what it's worth. Again, if you are using this for medical reasons, of course you want to talk to your physician. And this is just for educational purposes only. In terms of research on exercise performance in cannabis, I moved this down to just humans only here on the side with our good old friend, the PubMed. We have a total of 17 studies. And don't worry, I'm not going to bore you to tears going through the infinitesimal details of each one. But some of them may not even necessarily apply to what we're looking for here. Altered attentional control strategies, but spared executive functioning in chronic cannabis users. Kind of sounds interesting, but I would say not necessarily related to exercise performance. So even of these 17, for the direct terms, exercise performance and cannabis, there's just not a lot of data to go on in terms of we want to find a super cool randomized controlled trial with cannabis in elite athletes. I have not seen that study. And as you noticed, I didn't even check the clinical trial here because that basically drives everything to almost zero. The joke I make is it's like trying to find a really cool pool here in the middle of a desert. I guess this actually did exist, supposedly, for a period of time. You had to go through all this crazy stuff of getting a key to check out, to drive out to the middle of nowhere. Supposedly it was running off of solar power, but there's not a lot of pools in the middle of the desert, right? So expecting that we're going to have just boatloads and reams of research here on randomized controlled trials and elite athletes, not going to happen. However, we do have some other mouse studies, we do have some other mechanistic stuff, some principle-based things, and there have been a few controlled trials that have been done. So we are trying to piece together as much of the research as we can. Just be advised that we're in an extreme infancy of it. So recovery, what is it? I feel like I need to make a bad 80s Faith No More joke with that. Anyone remembers the video with the flopping fish? So what are the different components of it? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we could maybe subdivide them maybe into central versus peripheral, although I think that's probably even highly debatable at this point. But recovery has all different types of components. How I specifically think about recovery is the time frame, right? So if we do something to enhance your recovery, we should be able to decrease the time frame of when you can perform said task again. So if you're doing something crazy like German volume training, or you're hanging out with Dr. Pat Davidson and he convinced you to do like Mass 2, that's a great idea. Or you're reading some of Dr. Mike Isertel's, you're pushing your volume up super high to try to figure out where your limits are. I think all those things can be useful. And in the definition of recovery, I would argue that if we did the training, let's say on Monday with X amount of load and X parameters, and if it takes us, say, till Thursday, hypothetically, to be able to do that exact same performance again, by measuring that time frame, that gives us a good idea of what's going on with recovery. Now, from a research standpoint, that doesn't get into the components and the why, but in terms of a black box model, that gives us something we can work with. If we can now do some cool recovery stuff, and maybe we can drop that to Wednesday, right? Or maybe Tuesday or Tuesday night or however fancy we want to get. So if we can cut, say, 24 hours off of that normal time, we can then include more good training, right? We can push volume and overload up a little bit higher. So that's what I think of when I think of the term of recovery. If we pull the definition, a return to a normal state of health, mind, or strength. Cool, so that kind of fits with it. We apply some stimulus. Let's say here's our homeostasis. We move away from homeostasis, and then the body recovers. We get back again, and we can go a little bit more again. Right, so that's the definition that I'm using as recovery. My bias is that adaptation cannot be stopped, right? Like I showed with the mouse study, if you apply enough overload, yes, you can do things to alter that time course, but you will not drive those adaptations to absolute zero if you have enough overload and a few other things. Yes, there are some studies looking at responder rates, and there are a few, if you look at those graphs, some of the extreme responder work, if this is response, you see some guys or gals way up here, and yes, you do see some poor bastards down here who didn't make any progress. Most people are going to be somewhere around in the middle, so maybe we need to change things for those people down there. But in general, I would say adaptation can't really be stopped or completely halted with the correct amount of overload. But we can do things to change the time course, right? So we're going to look at some aspects of recovery and other things that are related to it. So here's a cannabis plant, just to take a little divergent down this, since a lot of this may not be super familiar for you. It definitely wasn't for me. And a lot of the stuff I had learned, I found out later, was just dead wrong. The few things I thought I knew. And again, this is back from 1887. All right, so we've got some early data. So here's my little short, going to be maybe 10-ish minutes or so, which I call the weed school. I looked this up online, and there actually is a cannabis training university. I don't know anything about them. I don't have any affiliation with them, but I thought that was quite interesting. I would imagine you're going to see that kind of popping up all over. And the reason we're going to take a little run down the cannabis rabbit hole is because it's very complex. If we're trying to study the thing that we think increases recovery or possibly has other effects on performance, we should probably have an idea of what that thing is, because that's going to vary on how you would set up a study and how you would hypothesize about what's going to happen. Right, so the genus, the term is Cannabis, is the sort of top of the term. Sativa is one of these subtypes of cannabis. Indica is another subtype, and a lot of times you'll hear people refer to this as, sativa is very uplifting, gives you energy, maybe some bronchial dilation. Indica makes you tired and sleepy. Some people refer to something called, couch lock, where you get stuck to your couch and can't move. Rumor is, I've heard that's happened to friends. And what people may not realize is there's actually a third type, ruderalis. And that's not talked about a whole lot. So again, if we were to classify subtypes, which you classically see are sativa and indica, and now what you find is a lot of them are, I can't seem to draw with crap here, hybrids. So they've been crossbreeding these two types for a very long period of time. So if we look at this, here is the sativa field, and how the rumor is that the name that sativa is very uplifting was from the structure of the plant. It's very much more kind of upright, and leaves are spread out very high. So it gets to be very tall. So the rumor was that if you looked at the plant, it's growing up, so therefore it must give you more energy or be uplifting. This is an indica plant, and you can see that it's a bigger plant. I think this is a purple kush, supposedly. But it's much more spread out. It's not nearly as high, and it's much more kind of clumped together. So it looks completely different than your sativa. Here's your last guy, ruderalis. Very small, not really used much at all. I haven't really seen much use of this one anywhere. So the rumor is that if you have sativa, it's going to be very uplifting. Indica is going to be the opposite. So you can imagine if you did a study on exercise performance and you used indica based on this current hypothesis, you may get a completely different result than if you used a sativa. And again, both of these are considered cannabis. And the third one. So again, if we use actual science to see what science says about this, here's a cool study where they took 14,031 SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, genotyped in 81 marijuana and 43 different hemp samples. What they found was that marijuana and hemp are significantly differentiated at the genome-wide level. And we'll explain the difference between marijuana and hemp real briefly coming up here. So they found, based on genetics, they were different. Surprisingly, they found only a moderate correlation between the genetic structure of marijuana strains and their reported sativa and indica. So that's not really as strong as going to what your local grower would say of the different effects with that. There's a study in PLUS 1. You can go pull that for yourself and have a good read on the weekend. One of their big takeaways in this study was strain names do not reflect a meaningful genetic identity. Uh-oh. Well, that's kind of busting our little thing that This plant is a sativa, this plant is an indica, or this is a percentage sativa, percentage indica if you're talking about a hybrid. When we look at the genetics of the plant itself, that does not appear to be true. If you check into this a little bit further, you can follow some cool interviews from guys like Michael Pollan. And their basis is that since these plants have been so inbred in different strains for so long, it's almost impossible to figure out what is what. Now again, there are differences. There are differences in how they grow. There are differences in how they look. But as we'll see coming up, there's multiple different compounds within each plant. So it is very possible that you can have completely different effects. But can we say that those effects are really only based on a specific strain? Probably not. And if you go back further in time, if you want to do analytical work, you would take a pure sample, let's say of our sativa here, do whatever analysis you want to do. Let's say you're analyzing this guy over here, and then you compare the two, right? And you could say, hey, this new sample that came in, this is a 60% sativa. But you need a 100% known sample of sativa in order to do that. And as far as I can tell, those samples don't exist because the plants have been so crossbred in time. So basing it only on sativa or indica, probably not all that useful. Granted, the entire industry is based on that right now. My gut feeling is that it'll probably change over time, but it's going to take a long period of time. So what are some of the different compounds within there? We have things called phytocannabinoids. Those are the cannabinoids that are found in the leaves, the flowers, the stems, and the seeds collected from the cannabis sativa plant. And as you've noticed already, so we're getting down to even more levels of detail. We could take things from the leaves, the flowers, or the stems, and they're going to have different properties. And that's pretty commonly true with most herbs. We also have endogenous cannabinoids. They are the ones that are made by the body. And there's a whole bunch of them. I didn't list a whole bunch here. We've got like our NAE, we've got our 2AG, and several other ones. So your body does actually make different endogenous cannabinoids. And they are used throughout the body for a host of different effects. We have our purified ones. These are compounds that are purified but isolated from plant sources. The main ones, which I'm sure you've probably heard of at this point, is CBD, cannabidiol, and then THC, 9-tetrahydrocannabinol. So THC is the psychoactive one that gets you stoned, bro. And pharmaceutical companies have been working on synthetic ones for quite some time because they potentially can be patented. These include a whole host of different ones. We've got some CB1 agonists. We've got some other CB2 agonists. This is probably one of the more popular ones that's been around for a while. But pharmaceutical companies have been working on this for quite a while. Because remember that if these are from a plant, they can't technically be patented. Although we'll see where that's kind of changed a little bit in terms of what patents have been granted. So in general, pharmaceutical companies have been working on synthetic versions for quite some time. One of the big questions then is, what is marijuana versus hemp? Basically has to do with the THC content. So marijuana has some level of THC, a delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, and that's what it looks like there. Hemp does not, or has very, very, very little amounts. And that's the main difference. How the plants look, how they grow is going to be a little bit different also. As of this recording, the Farm Bill just passed, so it is legal finally in the US to grow hemp, which is great because even our Constitution was written on it. Hemp used to be grown all throughout the US and throughout the world. Has lots of very good properties, super easy to grow, good fiber properties, all sorts of other things also. And it can be used also as a food. And if we want to add even more complexity to it, as if it wasn't complex enough already, there's about 113 cannabinoids that have been identified so far in cannabis. And again, this mirrors a lot of other plants. right, from different herbs to even just broccoli, right? It's usually not just one component that's in there. There's multiple different components. The main one that you've heard about, as I mentioned, is THC. THC was first isolated in 1964, and out of the 113 that they found so far, I would venture that they might find more in the future. THC is the only psychoactive cannabinoid, which to a lot of people is probably surprising, right? Because you think, oh, cannabis, oh, THC, oh, you mean there's like other stuff in there? The other main component in cannabis is CBD. CBD was first isolated in 1940. It was actually isolated before THC. And when they first isolated, they believed that it was going to be psychoactive. Turns out that it is not. And CBD currently is legal, which I have in quotes because when you see this, the laws may have changed. But CBD is being much more tolerated now in the supplement industry than it has been before. Hopefully it will continue to be legal, especially with the passing of the Farm Bill. But in terms of government regulations, who knows? So those are the two main compounds in there. But keep in mind, there are many other different cannabinoids in cannabis. These primarily interact through something called the CB1 and CB2 receptors in the body. And these are located pretty much everywhere in the body. So years and years ago, we didn't know that there was even a system in the body. And so now we're just trying to figure out what exactly they're used for. And you can imagine that different cannabinoids will have different effects on CB1, possibly CB2, possibly not even affecting the CB1 or 2 receptors, but maybe playing a role to inflammation, pain receptors, other massively different interactions within the body. So we've got two main compounds. We've got a bunch of other compounds that can act with different receptors or have completely different downstream effects. As you can tell, the complexity gets higher and higher. As of this recording, cannabis as a plant is a Scheduled I drug by the federal government. In order to be a Scheduled I drug by the government, you have to have a high addiction potential and you have to have no medical use at all. So by strict definition, cannabis doesn't really fit those two things. Again, I'm not a medical or addiction medical specialist, but that's what I've seen from the research. Marinol, so droneobilone, has been a synthetic form of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol for a long time. August 1994 was the first version in a capsule that was released from what I could find. So going back to 1994, there's already a medical use for it, so you would think that that would make it not really a Scheduled I drug anymore. And the reason why I bring this up is if you're trying to do research on a Scheduled I drug, it is very, very difficult, at least research in the US. And that's going to severely limit the amount of data that we're going to pull from. I add in that a lot of people who do research, there isn't as many people that are concerned with performance, and there's other diseases to study. So, expecting there to be a ton of research on cannabinoids, and that as a Scheduled I drug done within the US, not going to be a lot. But we can look to other outside companies for some of that research. Interesting enough, cocaine is actually not even a Scheduled I drug. You're like, whoa, wait a minute, how does that work? Because there's actually a medical use for it. So here's one of the position statements here. American Academy of Ornithology Head and Neck Surgery considers cocaine to be a valuable anesthetic and vasoconstricting agent when used as part of the treatment of a patient by a physician. And what they go on to say is no other single drug combines the anesthetic and vasoconstricting properties of cocaine. Right? So you can imagine if people were snorting cocaine and you get some nasal numbness, oh, hey, there's a pretty good medical use for this. So even cocaine is not considered a Scheduled I drug because there's a medical use for it. All right, so now we add in, okay, what are different delivery methods, and does that change anything? So 1870, the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal, they called these Grimnault's Indian cigarettes, or what's commonly referred to as a joint. It's just a paper with some rolled cannabis in it. So we have different delivery methods. So in terms of inhale it, there's different ways to inhale it or smoke, right? You can vaporize it, which has become a lot more popular now. In terms of vaporizing, you could vaporize a specific oil that has been prepared. There's different ways to prepare the oil to see what kind of compounds you are keeping in there in terms of terpenes and other smaller amount of compounds, which are not even really technically considered cannabinoids. THC amount, or what's called flower, which is just the dried cannabis itself. Or you can go old school, right? So that's what I refer to as smoking it. So 1870 is the first sort of modern reference I could find. You can obviously go back hundreds of thousands of years and find more use of it before then. There's also edibles, which you would consume as more of a food product. They're actually metabolized as a different drug. So when the THC, when you consume it as an oral or an edible, a liver changes it to 11-hydroxy-THC. The pK of it, so pharmacokinetics of that, are drastically different than if it's vaporized or smoked. One of the main things that you'll notice is that if you vaporize or smoke, the effect is very fast, which is what you would expect from the drug delivery. And if you ingest it, it can be very long. It can be up to 30, 60, or in some cases 90 minutes, which makes for some pretty hilarious edible stories if you ever talk to anyone who's done that. Not that I would know anything about that. There's also other delivery methods such as transdermal and other effects. So now we've got the research. You could look to see, did they vaporize it? Did they use kind of the old school method, which we have some studies on that? Did they use an edible, which is actually a different drug? It's a THC relative, but it is a different drug that the body is actually seeing, or some type of other preparation. So we add into this that you have to do some form of decarboxylation. In essence, you could sit down and make a salad out of cannabis leaves and eat it. Not much is really going to happen to you. You're like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. So decarboxylation, the two main catalysts for it are heat and time. So drying and curing of it will cause a partial decarboxylation to occur. Smoking and vaporizing will instantly decarboxylate the cannabinoids due to the extremely high temperatures present, making them instantly available for absorption through inhalation, which is why you're applying some type of heat to it. Vaporizer has a little bit of a coil inside that is heating it up into a vapor, or you're just burning it. So decarboxylation is a major important step for efficient production of the major compounds within it. So again, we're looking at delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, cannabinol, cannabidiol, CBD, and even other compounds like CBG. So these cannabinoids do not occur in significant concentrations in cannabis, but can be formed by decarboxylation of their corresponding acids, predominant cannabinoids in the plant. So you have to go through some kind of decarboxylation in order to get the active compounds that we want from it. Right, so if you're making some type of edible, you're going to do some type of heating, or you're going to do some type of oil preparation. You can get into the industrial manufacturing of these. There's things like supercritical CO2 extraction and all sorts of other methods. But you need some form of decarboxylation to get the active compounds to be present. How you do that will also change the amount of compounds that are present. So one of the biggest questions before we talk about performance is it even safe? If something is incredibly unsafe, you could argue, maybe we're not as concerned about the performance increases from it. So the short answer in one slide is generally yes. And if you want to go bonkers, you can pull all the different references here like I've done. And what you find is that overall, cannabis is very safe. I guess I would not say that there's no LD50 of it, right? So lethal dose to kill 50% of a population. But the reported toxicity of it is exceedingly rare, right? In terms of drugs and in terms of acute issues, the safety record on it is very safe. Now again, people can do stupid stuff, and at some point I'm sure there's going to be something bad that happens. But in general, considered to be very quote-unquote safe. So as we mentioned, what are you converting? So decarboxylation, you're converting these inactive ones, so CBDA and TCAA, into active compounds that we can actually use, right? So it's going to be a function of time, temperature, and atmosphere, or basically pressure at that point, in order to convert them. Also, when you are consuming them, right, so if you're doing something like modern vaporizers, have a way to change the temperature at which you vaporize them. This will change the amount of compounds that you can get out. So if we want to get more THC, right, if we just pull the boiling point, which is not uber accurate, but it's going to give us a known physical quantity to compare. 157 C is considered the boiling point for THC. CBD is very similar, so 160 to 180. So if you're using something like a vaporizer, and your goal is to get less THC, but you still want a high amount of CBD, again, all things being equal, right? The amount of product that you start with and the ratio of that is going to make a massive difference. But trying to change the temperature to only try to get CBD, not really going to happen, right? And now as strains have become super high in THC, they're actually trying to get strains that are much higher in CBD. Main reason for high THC content was it's considered illegal. So if we can get a more bigger bang for your buck, criminals can charge more money for it. But that's actually starting to reverse now. There's also other compounds. So if you want CBN, which may have some specific effects in the body, 185C, so even a little bit higher. Now if you want to get some of these subcompounds, this is called a terpene. This is beta-carnithenol, 130 degrees C. So in general, these terpenes or these other compounds, these are what kind of give it its different flavor profile and different smells, right? And terpenes are in all sorts of other different plants too. In general, the temperature for those is a little bit lower. So if you want to target this specific one, having a strain that has a high amount of it and possibly vaporizing it at a lower temperature, you may be able to get more of that particular compound and a little bit less of the THC or CBD at that point. So all of that to say, that's your crash course on weed, which is probably way more information than you ever wanted to know in your entire life. But it points out some of the complexities if you're trying to do research on this stuff. The strain that you want to test, you probably need to send it for an analytical chemistry workup and figure out what the hell is actually in it. You're probably not going to be able to take the word from your local bud tender of, ooh, this is a super high sativa. In a lot of the states, at least in the US where it's legal, a lot of places do have individual standardized testing that is done on each one. Again, this can vary a lot, so make sure you look at that and know what's actually going on. How it's decarboxylated, the temperature, whether it's vaporized, whether it's ingested, all of that's going to make a big difference. All those things aside, let's look at some of the actual studies that have been done on it. So one of the very first studies that I could find was a 1975 study. 20 healthy subjects. They consumed, by smoking, 1.4 grams of cannabis in a glass pipe. Now you can probably guess that by the year of this study, the concentration of THC was probably not super high. And I would say that's probably a safe assumption. So we saw a slight decrease in heart rate and blood pressure. I'm sorry, a slight increase in heart rate and blood pressure. We found a decrease in work capacity. So far for exercise performance, it's not really the direction I would want to go for something to be an ergogenic aid or something that's going to increase performance. No change in FVC, kind of a measure of breathing, or grip strength. So it's kind of strike one so far in 1975 on cannabis and exercise performance. Here's another one, 1986. So 12 young healthy volunteers, and they had a single cigarette of smoked cannabis. Again, we can look and see what the percentage of THC was. Right, so back then there just wasn't super high strains of THC. If there was, they're very hard to get. And again, 1986. So 1.7% THC. I didn't really have a placebo condition, which is kind of a problem with a lot of the studies. If you have people that are naive or people who have smoked before, it's probably going to change what's going on in the study. But for this one, no placebo. What you could argue is that since there's really almost no data at that point, there's one other friggin' study, that's probably going to be okay. What they found was cannabis use reduced max work capacity, raised heart rate, and increased metabolic rate. So again, similar to what we saw before. People may be freaking out and going, oh my gosh, metabolic rate went up. Ooh, cannabis is like the new thing to get lean. But as most people have reported, and there is data to support this, some different types or analogs of cannabis can increase appetite, so probably won't offset that. That's what we saw in 1986. That study was done in Canada, which has legalized marijuana now, so hopefully we'll see a lot more data and research coming out of Canada to try to figure out what's actually going on. So here's another one. This is pretty recent. This is 2018. Right, so new research. No direct evidence of performance-enhancing effects in athletes. Potential benefit effects of cannabis as part of a pain management protocol, including reducing concussive-related symptoms, deserve further attention. I would generally agree with that. If we're going to look at the exercise performance, at least in hard data we can find in studies, the exercise performance effect of cannabis, not so good. However, maybe pain management and possibly concussion-related, there's a much more interesting data in those realms, and I'd say the data in that area that's new is pretty positive. We have a lot of people who say, well, what about like for chronic diseases, right? And these are obviously not going to be elite athletes if you've got COPD, but if we take a disease model of pathology and these people use cannabis, would that help something like breathing, right? Because that's one of the claims. So the effect of vaporized cannabis on exertional breathlessness and exercise endurance in advanced chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a randomized controlled trial. Ooh, all those words that make scientists like me really excited. And I'll save you all the work. Pretty much no effect. Right, so this study is another brand new study, 2018. There's some other work showing that maybe on exercise-induced asthma, cannabis might be beneficial. Again, not a ton of data on that. But in another pathology model, not too much. So another study here, Cannabis, a systematic review. So looking at a bunch of different papers. So 15 published studies, looking at the effects of THC in association with exercise. None showed any improvement in aerobic performance. So when I did my poll of my buddies, one of the things that a lot of them said is that if I smoke or take cannabis before I do aerobic performance, definitely seems to enhance my aerobic performance. And maybe it does, for all the other reasons we mentioned. Who knows? But in terms of published studies so far, we have not seen that. Like I said, exercise-induced asthma was shown to be inhibited. So if you have exercise-induced asthma, which I'm sure all of a sudden a bunch of people will be claiming that they do now, maybe that'll help. Some subjects, however, could not complete an exercise protocol because of adverse reactions caused by cannabis. So if you're too stoned to do your exercise, yeah, definitely not going to help your performance. Now, the caveat to that, you could say, well, what was the amount? How much was used? Was it recreational people? Was it people that smoke daily? Do they have a tolerance? And all of those are good questions we don't really have a whole lot of answers to. But the data we have so far, which again, I will admit is not that much, shows that cannabis probably not the best for exercise performance. In terms of strength, power, what we consider classic markers of exercise. Here's another one, 2011, Cannabis in Sport Anti-Doping Perspective. Much more scientific information is needed based on current animal and human studies as well as on interviews with athletes and information from the field. Cannabis can be performance enhancing for some athletes and some disciplines. So their argument there is if you expand this out, and again, this is 2011, maybe some sports where you need to relax or possibly concentrate a little bit more or other things like that, maybe cannabis could be beneficial in some other sports. And again, right, if we compare the sport of archery to the sport of powerlifting, they are quite different. So we're looking across great sport disciplines here. One little hint I'll give is if you're playing a contact sport, such as the American football, some interesting data on that. THC has a direct dose-dependent toxic effect on brain mitochondria, and they demonstrated this in the first time that THC mainly inhibits the complexes 1, 2, and 3 of the mitochondrial respiratory chain and decreases mitochondrial coupling. In short, if you are inhibiting your electron transport chain at these points, that is not going to be good for energy production. The downside of this was, it was a little mouse study. So whenever we have a mouse study, I'll pop up the little mouse here in the corner. And it was done on slices of the mouse brain that was taken out. So again, 2015 paper. And we don't know if you could get those high levels of THC in a human or how they exactly translate to a human. But I thought it was interesting that there are potentially some downsides to specific compounds found in cannabis, THC being one of them. Tetrahydrocannabinol induces brain mitochondrial respiratory dysfunction, increases oxidative stress. That's the actual paper. THC increases those free radicals production by the brain, which likely participates in its toxicity. Right? But that's not surprising, right? Any compound at a high enough level is going to be toxic pretty much across the board. Right? Even too much water, right? You can die from drinking too much water, something called hyponatremia. So that's not that surprising. It basically just leaves up a lot more questions than answers, but some animal data to show that high levels of THC can screw with your brain mitochondria. Again, that's a mouse study, so we have our little mouse there. This is a pretty good article I liked. Why cannabis should be considered doping in sport. So their argument there is that there may be some theoretical benefits of it and why we should take that into account when we're talking about sport. So you guys can read that on your own. In terms of recovery, we're looking at the effects of CBD versus THC. So we'll come back to this study here and its analogs on the effect of inflammation. And I always like to look at the stereochemistry. I'm probably one of the only goons that likes that. And what we see here is we've got our CBD compound here. We have our THC compound here. And they're not really that dissimilar. But as all you know, taken chemistry before, slight changes in what it looks like on paper can have massive different physiologic effects. All right, so on paper, they are pretty darn similar to each other. What exactly is CBD or cannabidiol? It is a non-psychoactive component of the cannabis plant. Shout out to Dr. Peter Rouse, who's the first person, going back 7 or 8 years ago now that I first even heard talk about this. The first time he mentioned it, I was like, what? What are you talking about? All the stuff from cannabis is psychoactive. It's like, no, this is something that's non-psychoactive and has potentials for recovery. So that was the first time I ever heard of that. And there's a lot more, I'd say, pretty okay supportive data now. It is true that the government owns a patent on cannabinoids as antioxidant and neuroprotectants. There's actually been several patents that have been issued on this. That one was in particular on CBD, issued on October 7th, and is expiring in 2013. So I found it was interesting that if you go back to why cannabis was made illegal, no medical use, but we have patents showing that, okay, maybe there is something to that. And now, as we said, hopefully this will become much more kind of widely legal. And as that happens with all things in the supplement industry, you're going to find all sorts of interesting, crazy people trying to jump on board the CBD bandwagon. And you're going to see probably even more CBD products coming out, which kind of scares me a little bit. And the caveat here, buyer beware, not all products are going to be created equal. Right now, CBD is very expensive. to try to get the compound, the cannabis that has it in higher amounts. There's not many people that have access to that. The processing of it is quite expensive. The companies that were doing it, there was a lot of legwork and a lot of legality question on it. So a couple takeaways on this is if it's really cheap, I don't know if I would trust it. If the company only makes CBD and they seem to have not existed yesterday and they're only making CBD and nothing else, it's not much for that company to risk if they get shut down. So that makes me nervous. I would look for other types of products that they sell, even like a mixed hemp, and I would ask the company for what is their traceability and can you see it? So you want to know where it came from, what manufacturing practices there are taking place. The good part is there are some companies that do produce very high quality products. I've toured one of them in Colorado and was actually very impressed by them. So they were doing a lot of great work and had a lot of checks and balances in place. So there can be good products out there. Just again, buyer beware, because I know there's going to be even more cheap CBD on the market, and a lot of it is crap. There is a pharmaceutical grade version of this now, Epidiolex, for GW Pharmaceuticals. It's a proprietary oral blend of pure plant-derived cannabidiol, or CBD, and they're using it under the kind of what's called the orphan drug clause to treat different types of drug-resistant epilepsy. So overall, a good thing. I just point that out because it's interesting that they were able to get a patent for it. But again, showing that for CBD or derivatives of it, for medical use, there is some very good data to support that. In general, across the board, if you've got some pain, right? So a lot of lifters have different types of pain. I just pulled this one from this review down here. You can read it yourself. Notice that it's not the same drug that they're always using, right? These are synthetically derived. This is a smoked cannabis. And here's what the result that they found. And this is a pulling of some of the studies that they looked at. In general, there's some pretty good studies to show that THC, possibly CBD, possibly other compounds we don't really know yet, have been shown to have beneficial effects on pain. So in terms of recovery, that may be one that's useful. Exact mechanism of that, I don't know if anybody really understands that 100% yet. And it's probably going to be different things. Now again, pay attention to the population on the left side. A lot of these are pathologies. So again, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work as well for you, but some data to show that it is beneficial in those cases. Also about pain and inflammation. CB2 receptor selects for phytocannabinoid beta-carpholine exerts analgesic effects in mouse models of inflammatory neuropathic pain. So if we have our little mousy friend who's got inflammation and neurotic pain, CBD has been shown to be beneficial for that, possibly other ones that act as a CB2 select agonist. So this particular compound, it appears to be really only an active on the CB2 receptor sites. There's our mouse friend. So you're seeing a lot more people supporting CBD now, and I think a lot of times it's like little lemmings going off the cliff. So we want to use research to figure out where exactly is this cliff and what are kind of the best things that we know of so far so we can make informed decisions. This is a very good review on CBD and its analogs in terms of inflammation. In summary, it appears to be useful. There's some limits to that, but it's a very good review if you want to read it. Again, some more data to show that CBD and inflammation can be beneficial. Now again, we still get into dose and that type of thing, which we have almost no idea what dose really. Where I do think there is some very promising data, again, it is still quite early, is in head trauma or TBI. So one of the better studies that was done, 2014, 3 retrospective reviews of the data. They looked at 446 patients combined who had sustained a TBI, so traumatic brain injury. They did a toxicology screen for THC, right? So because THC is illegal, they can't really do a prospective trial, so we had to do it retrospective. So they had to pull a bunch of patients from different studies, do a tox screen to see if THC is high, and then look to see what they found. I found actually a positive THC screen was associated with a decreased mortality in adult patients sustaining a TBI. So in terms of a hard endpoint, which is mortality, you're either alive or dead at the end of the study. Sounds kind of cruel, but it's easy to calculate in terms of research. People who had sustained a TBI, if they're positive for THC, that was associated with less chance of dying. So again, a human study showing that in terms of head trauma, some very interesting stuff. Last comment on this is I have a whole little short literature review that I've completed on TBI and the different possible mechanisms, everything like that. So that should be coming out soon, or you can probably Google it and find it somehow. But there's some very promising data in that realm. I personally, if I have any athletes that possibly may take hits to the head, like American football players, even soccer players from heading the football, I would highly consider a mixed cannabinoids in a hemp oil, standardized for CBD, high-dose creatine also. Those would be the two go-tos I would have right now. And again, that's not really a recommendation, that's just my personal bias. So cannabis and cannabinoids in sleep, a review of the literature. Again, maybe, right? The exact data on those compounds in sleep, the little bit that I've seen, I would say not super positive. They concluded that CBD may hold promise for REM sleep behavior disorder and excessive daytime sleepiness. Now again, those are frank pathologies. If you're Bob and you just don't sleep well at night and get enough REM, doesn't mean it's going to be really that helpful. From anecdotal reports I've seen some people say it really helps with deep sleep. I haven't noticed a massive difference. It's an N-of-1 using an Oura ring to measure using CBD isolates and mixed hemp oil isolates that have been standardized for CBD. So I would say maybe. I think the biggest thing there is if you have anxiety that's preventing you from having to sleep, trying to turn off that monkey mind. In that particular case, CBD or THC or other derivatives might be helpful in that. Okay, so as we wrap up, what are some actual practical points? We're closing in on 1 hour. Standard warning about legality, you've heard that already. THC versus CBD, right? So THC is a compound that is currently considered illegal. Also has these psychoactive effects. CBD does not. Methods of consumption are going to depend on what works for you if you so happen to do that. But it makes the research really confusing because all the different things, how it's decarboxylated, the amount, the type, the other terpenes, the other compounds that are in there, makes it really hard to figure out what the hell's going on. And then again, different sport dynamic, right? If you're playing archery or you're doing Olympic weightlifting, those are considered sports, but have very different qualities that are going to be almost on bipolar ends. So I would say test your outcomes. If you want to do something and test things out, you can run your own N-of-1. Make sure you pick a solid outcome and see if it's beneficial or not. Data in terms of mass scale is lacking. Probably not going to be there for quite some time due to the complexity of it and the fact that in the US it's still considered federally illegal. So again, if it's something you opt to do or you have your athletes do, for God's sake, make sure you read the testing standards so they're not breaking any rules and get caught. And each person has to weigh what the risk and reward is at that point. A couple points on CBD. I get this question like all the time now. The pros is it may help inflammation and pain. There's some pretty good data on that. It's currently legal. And I think one of the bigger indications is TBI or head trauma risk. Now, do you have to have taken it beforehand before you get whacked in the skull, or can you take it after? I'd say that's up for debate right now. I think some of the prophylactic data is a little bit better. There's an animal model showing that it may help the blood-brain barrier stay intact. So I think that's a very fascinating area. My personal bias is I take it before I do a lot of kiteboarding in case I get dropped on my head. Again, that's my bias. Cons, right now CBD is expensive. And I would say that might even be a pro. Because if you find really, really cheap CBD, I would say it's probably not CBD. Again, not much long-term data, but we're starting to slowly accumulate it. And the question I get all the time now is, well, what is my starting point? So after you've spent 3 years looking at all this research, give me the back of the envelope where you would start. Right now, I would say, and this may change probably after this is aired, who knows, depending on the data. I would say start with a mixed cannabinoid or a hemp oil. I think the other cannabinoids we'll find are probably going to be beneficial. I know CBD is like the hot, sexy one right now. And it is one of the major constituents, but I think we'll find the other cannabinoids in specific combinations are probably going to be more beneficial. Again, that's a guess at my point right now. Make sure it is standardized for CBD, because that's going to give you an idea if they actually know what the heck is in that. And any company worth its salt will standardize for CBD. My guess is around 18 milligrams once a day as a starting point. Now again, if you have specific diseases you're trying to treat, obviously talk to your physician. But in terms of where you would start for a cost and a risk to reward basis, that's probably where I would start. That's my personal bias. Again, highly theoretical at this point. And you can go too high, you're probably going to see some negative effects. Too low, you're probably not going to see enough of an effect. So, big takeaway, that's where I'm at right now, and that is entirely subject to change. So thank you very much for listening to all this. I greatly appreciate your time and enjoying this journey on cannabis and the effect of exercise performance and CBD on recovery. That's myself there and my wonderful wife who's helped me with everything here. So more information if you want it on me, just www.miketnelson.com. Thank you all very much. Big thanks to Renaissance Periodization for allowing me to do this. Thank you all very much.